So we're here for the regular sea level rise subcommittee meeting of the Lewis Planning Commission. And the main purpose of today's meeting is to review the presentation material that Bob has graciously put together and decide what needs to be, any changes that need to be made to it to go ahead for the public hearing. Secondarily, I think Janelle, you found something that you'd like to have corrected in the draft ordinance that we have.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of things. First, I received a letter today from a member of the public who is listening. They had concerns that this subcommittee was not addressing the wastewater treatment facility in this ordinance. And I'm just going to note that this ordinance is a citywide ordinance. We are not looking at a specific facility and the rebuilding of a facility or the protection of a specific facility. So I can forward that letter. However, the request and the information in that letter is beyond the scope and the purview of the subcommittee. So I'm just going to give that as a heads up because it was asked to forward it to you guys, but just understand that it's not something that the subcommittee can get into. It's beyond our purview. It's really for the BPW to look into.
Yeah, just to reemphasize what Janelle said, any existing structures are grandfathered, and this ordinance is about new and redevelopment. It also doesn't make any changes to the existing 500-year floodplain. So any changes like to the wastewater treatment facility should be brought directly up to the Board of Public Works.
And then as I was reading the ordinance for like the 100th time, maybe it was just me, maybe it was just the way I was reading it today. I noticed that for critical facilities and redevelopment, we really don't address the 100-year. I mean, sorry, for critical facilities, we don't really address the 100-year. What we do is we talk about, public utilities and them being designed to minimize flood damage and to use the 40-year sea level rise projection. And then when we talk about new construction and redevelopment, we just said if you're building it within the 0.2. So the draft ordinance is silence on what we should do with the 1%, which
the 1% for regular buildings or critical facilities?
Critical facilities.
So since you've adopted the IBC excludes building critical facilities in the 100-year.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure because I was reading it for like the 100th time and I'm like, all right, I'm missing that. And I just wanted to make sure we were perfectly clear that we do not want critical facilities in the 1%, the 100-year floodplain.
So I think that's addressed somewhere else. If somebody were to put a critical facility in the 100-year, it would require whatever variance, appeal,
Okay,
council approval, etc.
perfect. I just wanted to make sure we were clear.
Which version of IBC was that added to?
So I think it's been in there for several years.
Okay, because we are just in the process, or the city is just in the process of deciding to update to the
18 or 20. Yeah, I think it's, I'm pretty sure it's in the 12, 14. It's been around for a while because most of the FEMA flood stuff has kept it out.
But for clarity's sake, I think for what Janelle just said, even though it's in IBC, we don't want the building officials to miss it and get into the condition where we inadvertently approve something since we're dealing with critical infrastructure here, wouldn't it be beneficial just to make sure that we call it out? So it's crystal clear?
I don't see the harm in it.
I'd be for that.
Okay.
I mean, unless there's some precedent that says, you know, it just further confuses things. I think it helps. I mean, I think it's interesting the way Janelle read it and was wondering why we didn't have something. If a planning official could do it, I'm assuming others can too.
Does that make sense,
Okay.
Brent?
Yeah, I don't have a
Okay.
problem with that.
All right.
Just as long as it doesn't conflict with other sections of code that, and I don't think it does, but
Well, we still have to get this through attorney review. So hopefully they'll triple check and make sure we're not conflicting. And I can always put in 1% no or per the ICC that we're currently using. Okay.
So,
Okay.
Thank you very much, Janelle, for catching that, because I think we've talked about it so many times, but
That we just thought it was, and I think it's there, but sometimes I just want to be a little extra, reinforce that the intent is not lost, that we don't want that there. Okay. Did you guys want to adopt minutes from the last couple of meetings
yeah, let's do that to get things cleaned up.
through the
So
agenda?
We have two sets of meeting minutes here.
Yes.
The first one is January 6th, I believe. Yes.
Yes, and I just cleaned them up for spelling of names, just an FYI, from what was originally submitted. So that's all I did.
I don't have the notes right in front of me at this moment. I'm pulling them up right now, but as I remember in one of them, and looks like it might have been this, that was the first one. There were several references to elevations and it talks about DAV 88. And in fact, that should be
NAV.
NAVD 88.
That's correct.
Right. So we just need to get that cleaned up.
Okay. So do you guys want to approve them as amended?
We have a motion to approve.
I move to approve as amended, both sets of minutes, if that's feasible to do that.
Do we have a second?
Yes, to accept them as amended.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
All right, I will clean those up and then we'll be good to go. Okay.
Now, so Bob has provided a very thorough presentation material, and I guess I'd like to go through it page by page here quickly, and agree to any changes or amendments to it. My first comment on it is that it's very thorough. I think it's a little bit too in-depth because we're never going to get through all 30 pages of this and still have time for public discussion. And I think some of the material is redundant with itself. So I have some thoughts on how to clean it up and still keep the gist of it. So with that, I think we'll just go through it page by page. So the first one, sheet one, I think is clear, and I like the way Bob has done it, where this repeats itself so that we keep the position of where we're discussing and what we're discussing.
Tom, given that we've got, it looks like 9 attendees, I'm wondering if we can put the presentation up on the screen.
I'm working on that.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Do you guys see it?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so, I have no issues with, sheet one. Does anyone else? Okay, hearing none.
I have a little bit of concern about the Cedar Street flood study information. I think it's great data. My concern is that is part of a project that has not been finalized yet. I'm not sure what GMB thinks because that's not data that's been presented. Not all of it has been presented. And I also understand that's the scientific inputs that we've used, but do we really want to focus on flooding or do we want to focus on the ordinance of sea level rise?
So I did have a conversation with Charlie, and I believe Charlie is probably on the call today.
Yes, he's on.
We did not, nothing in this package is from the raw data, and it's all from the public material that was presented at the flood study. So it's already in the public domain, and we're only using it as a representation of visual representation of what flooding is going to look like. So I don't want to put words in Charlie's mouth, but with the comments that we're going to get to later on, I think he was okay with us using what we did use.
I don't understand how we can separate a discussion, any kind of consideration of sea level rise without considering flooding. So I'm not really sure. I mean, from what I can gather of the materials that Bob put together, and Bob, thank you for doing this. What is in here from Charlie's study, just most of it's just imagery of flooding that's happened. It's not committing us in one way or the other as to what we need to do or how we'll get it done. But the fact is that sea level rise is going to cause flooding. And the way I saw those images was, these are a glimpse into the future. This is the kind of thing that we're going to see more and more frequently as time goes by. I think in the public conversation, that's an essential part of the presentation.
Well,
Okay, so
let me just say this. I watched the Cedar Street flood study on the YouTube channel here. And in it, Brando or Charlie made some statements such as, this is what a typical day will look like in 2050 if we have a high tide and so on. And I kind of said, well, gee, these pictures were taken October 30th. Everybody can remember that. And 2050 isn't that far away. So I kind of bracketed those two events and that statement. And that's why I thought including Cedar Street was important.
So
You're spot on, Bob.
I've added Charlie to the conversation so he can give us some added advice, because he did say he would like to remove animation slide 6 and the photos that describe the parcels and the homes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that might be more beneficial is, let's put this question on hold and go through the slide deck and then see where we can come back to it. Because I think we, not only has the GMB say that this was representative of what's going to happen in 2050, that statement has been in many sources, whether it was for Norfolk, Miami, sunny day flooding across the slate. On top of that, I think what you'll see is, as we go through the slide deck, we're only using those pictures and data as illustrations of what flooding is potentially going to look like.
No, I completely understand it, though the first slide says that it was used for scientific input, and
Fair
we
enough.
have not used it, we are using it as an example. We have not used that in the creation of the ordinance. So that's my concern from that perspective.
I think that makes plenty of sense.
Okay.
And Tom, to your point, you know, you all know I sent out, you know, a fairly long rant on a lot of these topics before a big flooding event, you know, maybe a month ago now. I also have a lot of photos that look very much like the photos that Bob lifted out of the Cedar Street flood study. We can replace everything that was in that Cedar Street flood study with things that we've generated already. So I don't see it as it being a total issue, but I agree with what Janelle's saying here. I misunderstood what you were saying, Janelle.
Yeah, sorry, that's all I was trying to say about that one. Okay. Slide 2.
So slide 2, the only thing I'd like to add is the source. So I think all the slides, we need to make sure that we reference back to what the source was. So this, I assume, came from
The
This comes from
technical
that
report.
Yeah, it comes from
Yeah,
the technical
the
report in 2017.
the Delaware State Technical Report. I've got to get the full title of that. So other than that, I think this, as annotated, represents what we're doing. Does anyone else have any concerns with this slide?
Well, I just want to make sure that that there's a lot of wonderful additions that Bob has made to the original graph. I just want to make sure that for every piece of information in here that we add, that we're gonna use it in some way. So, for example, he's got the 1/2 meter and the 1 meter chart lines on there. Do we actually have those later on? If we don't, we should take them out, or we should reference what those mean. I'm assuming when you put those in, Bob, you meant to refer to the mapping products that are available for
Yeah.
1/2 meter sea level rise and 1 meter sea level rise. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Because we could add those, or at least reference them somewhere. But I think this is a pretty powerful graphic.
Well, yeah.
I just don't want to be so busy that people lose what matters.
I mean, this is the basis for everything we're doing, so.
Okay, slide 3.
Once again, the source we need to add, and I believe this came from,
I think this is NOAA data.
It's NOAA data from the site.
In some cases, I have the sources down in the notes there.
Yeah, Bob, I can help you. I know where all these things are. We can do that. I've been kind of busy the last couple of days. I haven't had a chance to get back to you, so I can definitely help you get all these sources nailed down. What you want to make sure, Tom, is that they're actually on the slide.
yes, I think up in the top of the title.
Or just sometimes you can do it down at the bottom just so as they're sourced. Okay.
Yeah, wherever, just so that we, you know. Now, slide 4.
Again, it's from NOAA.
I think
Right.
one of the challenges with this map, there are a lot of different ways we can make maps like this, is that there's no demarcation of the city of Lewis boundary. I don't know if that's important. Most of the folks, I assume, that would come to a meeting would be able to at least know something about, you know, they'd be able to relate to this image. I just don't know how important it is that we have the city of Lewis boundary on here.
Well, frankly, I put that in there as sort of a placeholder. And if you have a better map that goes in there, I'm all for it because it's what I could find. So
Okay.
What are we trying to
let me
communicate?
ask you to find one and we'll stick it in there. Okay?
Because my question is, what are we trying to communicate with this map?
Well, I was trying to communicate there's a lot of flood prone areas. That's the 100-year flood, basically.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question? Are we trying to convince the public and the council that sea level rise is real? Or are we just going through information that is out there that we've presented before, that Tom set up the water resource presentation in, was it November? If you're not aware of this by now, I feel like we're going to lose the point of what we're trying to accomplish with the ordinance that we're
ordinance?
putting forth.
So
You
I
have
think
to
we're trying
also
to,
get through a public hearing.
yeah, I think we're trying to do two things here. One is we want to make sure that the ordinance is asking for the public to, or the citizens of Lewis to give up certain things relative to development because of sea level rise. But if they're not aware of how serious it is and who's impacted, it's hard to make that, it's a cost benefit analysis. But to your point, the reason why I think we need to color the deck, and we'll take a lot out later on, is because we don't want to lose people and have their eyes glaze over. So that's why I was asking you, what's the point of this slide? I'm not sure, given.
I mean, like only 25% of that slide is city property.
Right.
I mean, I can't remember in any water workshop that we've done so far, a map that portrayed what I'll call at-risk areas. And there are any number of ways of painting and of classifying at-risk areas, but getting to the point that Tom just made, I think we're past the time where we need to have some maps that show people the areas that are most threatened by sea level rise. So if it's not this map, we need some map or a couple of maps, whatever it's going to be.
So
We
it
need
sounds like
something.
So it sounds like Bob wanted this map to be the floodplain map, which ties back into the ordinance because the ordinance references if you're in the floodplain, you're subject to this ordinance. So I can get a map that shows the floodplain because I've got all of those data sets, and it can show the different floodplains, and it can show the city boundary. Would that be helpful?
Well, those maps are later on. This is a map that I'm not sure the thresholds that were used in classifying something shallow coastal flooding areas. I'm sure that it's in this
Right.
NOAA
So
site, but this is more tying to the graph. Okay, for a certain level of sea level rise, this is what it looks like on the ground, and
right.
I think this is
But
powerful stuff.
we're setting forth an ordinance for the 1% floodplain.
And
So
the
we need
point
to
to
know what we're putting the ordinance forth for. This red may follow that. It may be shallow, it may be deep, it may be inside the 100, it may not. We're proposing a different finished floor for the 100 year. So we need to show the 100 year of where this is going to apply.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect is that the frame of view on this map is much too large. It goes far too much to the north because it shows, the majority of the map is Prime Hook and up that way. So I think we need something that's more focused, and if there's a way of showing either this or, as Janelle proposed, the floodplain map.
Well, yeah, right now we've put a lot of eggs in the basket of making all determinations relative to the 100-year floodplain. You know, from the very get-go, I've had problems with that being the sole focus of what we're doing here. The graph that we just had up there 2 slides ago with the red, green, and blue lines doesn't care a hoot about 100-year floodplains or 500-year floodplains. This is water. This is this is our future. And we need to come up with a way of envisioning that future beyond the FEMA flood insurance based mapping effort. Again, whether it's this map or some other map, I think we still need to figure that out. But I think it's really important that we have, I mean, we could pick any number of points off that 3-curve slide 2 slides ago. I guess it's slide number 2, and say in the year 2040, in the year 2060, here's where sea level is going to be. Now, of course, as we all know, you know, that sea level represents an average of the water level that happens over the course of the day, over the course of the week, over the course of the month, the year, and so on. It's a lot more complicated than any one level, but somehow we need to get beyond simply looking at this through the lens of 100-year floodplain. The way I saw this map is saying there's this bigger issue beyond how we're going to regulate things right now. Everything that follows later on, there are a whole bunch of maps later on in this slide deck that already are floodplain maps. Either we can use those, or Janelle, maybe you have something that is more Lewis appropriate, but I still think there's value in a map like this. This may not be the right threshold. It might not be the right elevation, but I think we need to have something that shows when we have a flooding event of this level, here are the areas that are wet, here are the areas that are near the wet, here are the areas that are high and dry. I mean, is that wrong?
So your last 2 sentences, you just said it. It may be a different elevation. So what elevation do you pick?
Yeah,
And
I don't
you
know.
just said, if there's flooding, this is where the flooding is going to be, and that's what the FEMA flood maps represent. So the FEMA flood map represents the flooding and takes care of that designation. But what elevation do you pick? The council picked in 2016 to go by the green line. And as we've all said before, it's not prescriptive. So in 2050, it will not be that exact elevation. That's a model, and every model that's ever been run is wrong because data can change, different patterns, everything. So you can have a model from NOAA, you can have a model from FEMA, you can have a model from XYZ engineering, you can have a model from 123 engineering, and all 4 of them are going to show something different. So we could put maps and maps and maps and maps in here showing all model results, and they're all going to be different. But what the ordinance is directed at and what the ordinance can speak to is the finished floor in the 1% and 0.2% floodplain.
I agree with Brent.
If we start throwing all these colored maps in there, yeah, we know sea level rise is coming. We know places are going to be inundated. We start getting into a point of, well, I never knew that my house was going to be underwater. So now this is out there in the public domain. Somebody else picks it up who wants to move to Lewis and goes, well, I'm not buying that house because that's a flood house. And it's a very slippery slope. And that's why we've kind of requested that slide 6, because it is zoomed in a little bit tighter. You can kind of pick and choose off that model run houses that are inundated or not. And again, it's just a model. We got pictures that showed different results of what that model has because there's rain involved, because we can't model the rain and the tide at the same time. So
Yeah, and
our
I'll
ordinance that
just-
we're putting forth is we're changing the finished floor and we're changing the lot coverage in these areas, and this is the area that it affects.
Okay,
Yeah, and
so
I'll just add that, I think if you want to put a map in here that's a little bit more representative of the 100-year floodplain, because that's what the ordinance is based on, that's great. But, you know, you've got 5 sheets, 5 slides towards the end of this presentation that are dedicated to the language of the ordinance. And I really think that you can impress upon the public the importance and the nature of sea level rise and what Lewis is facing in the upcoming decades in far fewer slides, because it's going to take a good amount of explanation. I mean, we've been meeting on that ordinance for months now. It's going to take a good amount of explanation just to make it through those 5 slides so people understand the ins and outs of why the language is in the ordinance. I don't think you want to spend 25 slides before that just making people believe that sea level rise is a real thing. I think you can do that, and you can do it, but you can do it within 5 or 6 or 7 slides.
So
Yeah,
let me ask you this, maybe, you know, there's a slide, I don't remember what the number is, that gets at flooding frequency. And I think that's maybe the more important aspect of this. It doesn't speak specifically to the geography. And you know, Brent, I
It's
hear
like 14.
what you've said, and I guess I can live with that. But where I'm coming from with this desire to have mapping and to have specific imagery is for people to understand that whatever the case has been in the past, here it is, slide number 13, whatever the case may have been in the past, however we want to characterize the level of flooding and the, you know, where the high water is, this flooding days graph number 13 in the mix here should impress upon us all that as time moves forward, what you know to be the extreme flood is no longer going to be the extreme flood. It's
Right.
going to become a much more regular event. And Brent, I think when you guys did your Cedar Street study, you made reference to this kind of a situation. And I think if we can make no point for any landowner to consider, it's this point right here.
No, and I do like this slide
Yeah, I like this one too.
because this one does not drill down where somebody can say, you devalued my property, or I'm not buying that property because of that. And maybe, I don't like to call it desensitized because I'm very sensitive to it, but I've seen too many lawyer stories and heard stories where they've gotten involved, and public presentation of potential parcel data information has been to blame. I don't want to go down that path.
Because I think what we're trying, oh, I'm sorry, Brent, go ahead.
I'm just saying we're carrying the water for the whole state, and doing this is, as far as I know, nobody else in Delaware is looking at this. So,
Well, they reference it in their documents. They just, nobody's making presentations like this, if that's what you mean. I mean, all these,
well,
No.
doing
all
a
this
sea
stuff
level
is like,
rise,
Ordinance.
doing a finished floor requirement because of sea level rise.
Yeah, I think this is one of the first ordinances for sea level rise in the ordinance. And I think the one thing we want to make sure of is this is all tying back to our ordinance, so we can explain our ordinance. Because I think, you know, we've done our research. You know, how do we explain our research? And then let's get back. So we'll figure this slide out. I think floodplain. But how do we want to? Do we want it? Because we're given like the history, like this is where we're going. I'm just trying to figure out the story. It's how my brain works. So we've given the history. It's like sea level rise is coming. Sea level rise is going to continue to impact. So, because I think the meat of what we're trying to do is explain our ordinance, correct?
so
So
yeah,
everybody understands our ordinance. I want to make sure I'm on the right page with you guys.
I think you are, but I think part of our problem in this subcommittee has, at least mine, has been, where are you? How high, how low? And, you know, how did we get to where we're at and the ordinance? So I think at some level you have to orient people, public hearing or city council, into what you mean.
So let me offer something that came to mind this morning after I had a chance to look at
If I can
all these-
interject, if I can, because we're spending an inordinate amount of time on this slide. And what I would propose is that we delete slide 4 for all the reasons that we've discussed. And that when we get to the ordinance, to help with the explanation of what the applicability is, we put in the floodplain map, the 100-year, 500-year floodplain map. I think we have enough graphs and enough photos and everything else to get the message across that we are at risk.
Fine with me.
So I can do this offline, I suppose, if you'd rather. One thing I thought about was trying to make sense of the elevations that we imagine are engaged here now and into the future. They all tie to, you make whatever datum you want, whether it be mean high water, or whether it be NAVD 88. We could actually evaluate the topography of Lewis and say what percentage of Lewis's land is at this elevation versus that elevation. It's not property specific, but it starts to show through time. Then more and more of, if we were to sort of analyze the elevations of the city, I think we would see that a growing portion of the city's real estate, not specific to a given parcel or an owner's property, will be engaged with the sea as time goes by. And somehow I think that's valuable. I'll try to work up something and
But again, I asked the question of what does that ultimately get us at the end of the day?
Right, and the ordinance, we're only claiming jurisdiction over the 100-year and 500-year floodplain at this point. So I think
Yeah, the 100-year is all sorts of elevations of actual ground.
Correct. Because it's got wave run up, it's got all other things calculated into it.
Okay, so what are we thinking about this slide?
So, Bob, you okay with removing it?
4 or what's now 4?
Yeah,
The current slide.
I guess I am, as long as we get to that statement back there.
Right.
At the bottom.
Yep, I think we can actually add a slide of just the statement that, because I think what you guys are trying to say is, I think what you're trying to say is this, correct?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you can
So
say
I think
it
we
there.
can, yeah, I think
Say
we
that
say it
Zeta was
here,
the dress rehearsal.
that as we continue to see, this will continue to happen. And I think this gets this across, and I think we can reference, hey, everybody's kind of seen just the last year we've had flooding issues, and based on this is going to continue to happen. That makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, the only other piece is that as you move along the horizontal axis here, sort of the worst case scenario, the worst flood you might see in any given year is going to go up. So those really low percentage storms they're not going to stay where they are now. They're not going to stay where the 100-year floodplain has them. They're going to continue to get higher as the sea continues to rise.
Right. And because it's the 100-year flood doesn't mean it's going to happen once every 100 years. It can happen. You're going to see that more often. I think that's also what we're trying to say, is right.
Well, this slide that you've
Yes,
got
this slide.
basically says by about 2090, you have it every day.
Right. So how do we prepare for that? And I think that's where we get into our ordinance. Yes.
And then as long as I got the floor a second for this, the slide before pretty much says the same thing. I found another source, if you will. That
I would
pretty
leave that one
much,
out.
so that one could come out.
I would
Okay.
suggest I would agree with that. I would take number 11 out.
Okay.
That's a hard map to read, given all the shades they've got in there.
And I think this one really great job finding this one. This one does a great job of doing that. Okay.
Give that to Sumner.
You guys did a great job. Okay, so we've got the floodplain map. Do you want me to?
Let's go
This
back
is-
to slide 5. And try to work our way through it.
Okay.
So
So Brent, you're suggesting we take all these out?
No, no.
can we go back to 4?
Yeah, I think
Are
we
we-
said this one's coming out.
Okay.
So let me. Okay.
So
My question's going to be if we want to leave these in, do we want to put this one first and then use the photos as an example of
Yes.
what we're going to keep seeing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I would present the information and then show how it actually is now doing that, and just kind of click through those 4 pictures and say, here's representative of,
What we're seeing now and we're going to continue to see in the future
right.
or more of in the future if we don't get this under control?
I
All right.
think,
I think Sumner has some pictures
Yeah, I've got all sorts of
that
pictures.
same day that he could stick in there that aren't all Lewis Beach.
So how, well, so
So I
so
would
how
limit it to
important is
5.
it? Sorry?
So I would limit it to 5 pictures.
I'd be
But
fine with 5, but if
how-
you had one from,
Somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, if you replace 3 of these with other, that's fine. But
Yeah,
just
if
5
you
total.
want to go like Canary Creek area, let's not just focus on the beach because we all know it's not just the beach. So if you've got other photos, send them. Because I'm currently amending this, so if you want to send them to me, I'll add them in. I'd be happy to. If you're not, you guys more, you can add them.
So these can be illustrative. They don't have to match perfectly the elevation. I mean, like Bob, I don't remember from the slide that has already been removed. Is that 56 centimeter, the 20 or whatever it is, does that tie with the storm that's depicted in those pictures? Does
I
that
think it's
elevation above mean high water work with that?
no, it doesn't. That was something that I found.
Because we can do that. Like we could go to that storm from the ones you got here or the storm for which I've got pictures, and we can adjust the elevation that's on this graph that's on the screen right now and see that frequency curve.
Well, I
So
think
we
we
can
can
do
do
that.
that if we can. I didn't know we could do it.
Yeah, but so again, that's going to tie you to a specific elevation that's going to happen at one point in time in the future, and it'll blow by it. If you keep it general and say, we all remember Halloween, we all remember Zeta, this is going to become the norm in the future.
yeah, I think, I'm not sure that we need to, this is a good representation. It comes from a federal source. I don't see the need to tweak it.
Yeah,
I
but
mean, it's
this is
showing the
yeah,
trend.
all right.
Okay, and then we'll just add a couple of photos. And I'm just going to interrupt real quick because
On the
Mr. Quill
photos-
is providing a bunch of running commentary. Mr. Quill, your concern is regarding the excellent recharge area ordinance. That is not part of sea level rise subcommittee. So just keep that in mind. They will both we will take public comment on both of those ordinances on March 11th also. So sea level rise subcommittee, don't forget, this isn't the only ordinance we're going to take public comment on. We've got the excellent recharge area we'll be taking public comment on at the same night. Okay, so we've got photos. I'll leave that one.
Well, two
Go.
of the photos the first one and the last one are duplicates.
Okay. And then I'm
So
gonna
we
leave
eliminate
some-
one, and then if somebody you can provide or get some from on
I've got
the,
other areas. I went all around that day that I was taking pictures. I covered a lot of those other sort of low areas.
Okay, perfect. So I'm guessing we don't need this one then?
Right.
well,
Okay.
think we-
And I think we
definitely-
said we don't need this guy because we liked the other one better, right?
Yes.
yes,
Okay.
we can go back to the one, hold on, Janelle, the one you just deleted 2 ago, the one.
The
I think
photo.
we need a definition of the king tide. We can add it to someplace else.
Okay.
Again, it's,
Again, we're trying to tie this in back to the ordinance you guys worked the last year on.
I understand, but this explains what those photos were.
so actually the king tide was 2 weeks prior to Zeta. So Zeta was kind of its own thing, but I don't want to get in the weeds of asking questions of, well, was it a king tide or was it a storm surge or was it a one-off thing or whatever? It was a named event kind of in the winter where Lewis typically sees all their higher tide events have been from nor'easters, like 6 of the top 8 are from nor'easters. This was a hurricane that pushed in. Just say, look, we all remember the water level here. This is going to become the norm. I wouldn't get in the weeds on specific elevations because I can tell you when we did our presentation for the Cedar Street flood study, I got comments back, well, my yard was wet and you didn't show it on your map. Well, I had tide information. I didn't include the rain information and the localized depressions in the corner of the roadway and intersection that ponded, you know, there's going to be localized things. But when you show a full road underwater, it expresses that thought process and the picture's worth 1,000 words of that's going to be the new norm.
No, and Brent, I agree with you, because old slide 5, I've lost track of what number it is now, does an adequate job of defining it then.
Okay, so we've got a floodplain map. I can update this one to show the city boundary. Yes? Because you guys wanted a little bit more geographic specific.
I mean, it just seems to me that's a good thing for us to have.
Okay.
I would put it directly before maybe we get to the ordinance though.
Yes, so let's keep going because do we need to reference, because to me, this is a duplicate kind of slide, except for we know the Delaware flood planning tool, awesome, really a lot of information provided there.
I think they're duplicates. I just put something in there because, you know, I couldn't find what I wanted that evening. And
Okay,
So Janelle, I
One's green,
know,
one's blue.
a really good one works. I don't think you need to do it twice.
Janelle, I'm assuming
Okay.
you can pull up the one that you just deleted. You can reference that state flood planning layer in ArcMap and add whatever layers you have from the GIS.
yeah,
I
I
don't know if
just
you can get
have,
this green one.
I have the FEMA floodplain data. So
Right.
yeah, I can turn that on and then, because we've used it in the past to discuss. So I can add that. Okay, now we're on to this guy. Is this a repeat of like the first one?
Well, it's repeated
Yeah.
several times. It's
Okay,
Just saying,
where we're at in the presentation.
Yeah, I want to say that, Tom, kudos to you for having Scott Andrus come and speak to the BPW recently. He had presented some of that information at one of our workshops, but in the context of that conversation, I was even more sort of rattled by the groundwater inundation story here. we need to highlight it. It could be kind of a 1-2 punch for low-lying areas all up and down the Delaware Bay shoreline, and for that matter, the coastal shoreline.
Yeah, what I was thinking on that,
There's a graph, I think you have it later on, that's a very powerful graph that relates sea level rise and water table rise. These maps are tricky. These water table mapping products, I think on their own, I think they give some idea of where the low areas are, where the high groundwater areas are. But just like Brent's been saying about getting in the weeds, about the storm versus that storm, there are at least 3 different versions of this map here. There's a normal, a dry, and a wet. And of course, those were based on when those evaluations were done. If I got anything out of the presentation that Scott Andrus of the Delaware Geological Survey made the other day to BPW, it's that these 2 will change moving forward.
So I think just like in the early discussion where we showed the frequency of flooding, I think this graph tells the story that we want to tell better than the maps do.
Okay.
I'm for taking it out. I just had it in there and then I saw your stuff. I think you took the wrong one out. Janelle.
Yeah, that last one, I think we won't spend a lot of time talking about this, and the one before this are actually good. Actually, maybe swap them, Janelle. Because the other one just shows graphically what's going on, why the water table is rising. But the graph before really tells the main story.
Having said what I said before about the challenges of getting to the weeds with the maps, I'm wondering if it's worth reinforcing the pattern of the map. The geography of where flooding occurs, where the greatest risks are, for the most part, also is the same geography where this groundwater,
Hi.
situation is the worst. We can say that, or we can show it. It's
So
not critical to me. But
I'll
we have
ask
to
the
make that
public
point.
question of how does this affect my finished floor?
Well,
It doesn't, but if you go outside, your socks will be wet.
So that, so again, our ordinance is addressing finished floors. Do we need to show groundwater table fluctuation?
Or can we just reference that as we've stated, we're going to see higher flooding, which is going to impact the water table, which is why we need this ordinance. Do we need all the graphs to say that? Or do we just need to say that?
I think that the water table rise versus year graph, that one, no, the one before it. I think this is a good pictorial representation so people understand what's going on below the ground.
well,
We've all heard the various stories that people have had of heaving of basement floors, increased water penetration into basements. The sea level rise is going to exacerbate that. While we're currently not doing anything in the ordinance about it, I think it is one of those key repercussions from sea level rise.
It's going to make every stormwater effort less effective.
I'm not
right,
sure
this
I'd say
this
every.
right here is what ties the sea level rise conversation together with the stormwater conversation that I hope at some point we do have.
Right.
I think it's fine to keep this slide in there, but just to sort of like what Janelle was saying, emphasize that as sea level rise occurs, it's going to have its effect on water table. But I don't think you need the next slide because that's just, you're going to have to explain that, and that's beyond your ordinance discussion.
So it may be that a number of these really useful illustrations are for perhaps later phases of work that I hope this committee or some next committee will address.
Agreed.
I really appreciate
Absolutely.
what Bob has done putting these together. And I appreciate you guys, you keep reminding us to stay focused on the purpose of this particular meeting. We still need to get to that later stuff, not before the public hearing, but I don't want to lose it.
Nope. Again, we still have an entire section of new development to get to. And again, we've got resiliency items we can look into. But I think today we want to focus on critical facilities and redevelopment, because that's the ordinance that is being put forward. And that's what we want the comments back on. Okay, so where we are so far is here.
So the missing date in the fourth bullet is February 2016.
The second bullet, Brent, I'm assuming you can help out with that. That's not really right. NAVD 88 is in my understanding is
It's a vertical datum.
surveyor's datum that's used to determine elevations relative to that 0 point. Sea level is actually something other than NAVD 80. It can be measured against NAVD 88. And we can pull the data off of the NOAA station out there in Lewis.
So I think by happenstance, I just closed my other presentation. I think by happenstance, sea level is 0 in Lewis. Just by
It's pretty close. It is pretty close.
Just how it worked out.
Close to 0. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's negative in Cambridge, but I think it's 0 in Lewis.
So instead of reading this, is this what you're trying to say? Is that we've got a ground floor, our base flood, our freeboard, and our sea level rise, and that's where you're building?
I like that.
Does this work for that? And we can explain this with the words, but show it? What do you guys think?
That's much more useful.
1 second.
No problem.
And I mean, I think the critical part of all this, building on some of the things that Brent said earlier, is we haven't pulled these numbers out of thin air. All the graphs and everything that were at the beginning form the basis for the top line in this chart right here.
Yep. Yeah, it's all about our differences between base flood and sea level rise and where that house is going to be. And I think, again, no numbers associated with it because the ground elevation and the base flood are going to be different. What we do know is we're adding 18 inches and then whatever that sea level rise is.
Well,
So-
and yeah, what's perfect is that, that graphic you put up there fits well with the slide that Bob had put together, which actually shows for each of the different scenarios what the current base flood is, what the current sea level rise is by the ordinance, and what the freeboard is. So maybe that slide that you just drew should go with, it used to be slide 27. It's like third from the end.
This one?
Yeah,
Okay.
because
So I like the graphic that you just had up. This is a busy table with a lot of numbers. I think to illustrate this, we need to keep that nice schematic that you just had a minute ago, Janelle.
Okay.
I mean,
Because
it needs
I
an
love all
asterisk
the
that says
data.
depends on what you're doing, which,
Yeah,
which
this
of
is-
these categories you fall under, but
And I also think it explains this formula right here with a diagram.
right, the sea level rise projection is a variable based on the number of years that you look out, which it's sort of a lookup table effectively, which category you fall in our ordinance, you follow that value. Does that make sense? A lookup table is a GIS term from way back in the day. You have a table with 2 columns. I know
old
the
DOS
number of
days.
years I need to go out, and then I should be able to pick off of the most current version of the technical sea level rise committee's projections, how many inches or whatever it's going to be.
Okay, Tom, you said the 4th bullet. I got February, and then I heard 16. Is that 2021 or what was the
It was February 2016.
2016? I knew I was gonna. I thought that, and I was like, what did I miss? Okay.
It's exactly 5 years ago.
Yep.
It was chosen. On what you were just talking about, I think the last 2 bullets on there are what we, after months of work, decided, okay, and that we had reasons for separating critical facilities and redevelopment from new development and so on. So the last 2 bullets there, Janelle.
Yeah, no, I want to highlight that one because I know Brent said sea level rise is not called NAVD 88, correct?
Now, do we even want to say anything about that?
I would leave that out.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you can leave it out. I'm not.
Okay.
I don't want to get in the surveyor class and have people start asking questions and why isn't sea level at 0 and
Because everybody gets confused.
so actually mean sea level in Lewis is minus 0.4. So it's 5 inches below so-called 0
Minus 0.4 what?
feet.
Okay. So I just tweaked that because I think we want to start off with like, this is the reason we're here is because in 2016, council said to do this.
Yeah. And those are the decisions we made.
Yep. And then this is what came out of it. And this is then our ordinance, the draft ordinance.
Going back to the last one with the freeboard, I would put in there when you adopted the freeboard, that has already been put in place by.
But that's already, that's from the existing building code.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that works.
So this kind of explains, if I'm looking at it from an outside engineer, I have an existing, and this is my proposed ordinance of finished floor. So the first 3 kind of explain
A little bit of history and how we got there, right?
Yeah, the history and the existing, and then the next one is how it changes, what's different.
Well, along those lines, is it worth going to the trouble to make a table that shows the effective change in elevation?
Well,
No, because it changes.
Chart.
Status quo versus the proposed ordinance.
So
in it-
that this
So
covers
it's right
it.
there. It's just that last zone. Okay. Fair
Yep.
enough.
Okay.
Okay.
So then we move into the ordinance.
Mhm.
And then you guys said you wanted to replace this with the diagram.
Yeah,
Well,
so
I
Correct?
don't know
Or
how
did
you
you
do
wanna
that in
leave-
a-
in the, if we go back to the ordinances, Janelle,
Yep.
the proposed 1, 2, and 3,
Yes.
those titles, I mean, this is the proposed ordinance, so
Okay. So let's just. Okay.
and it makes it almost look like there's three different scenarios.
Okay.
And then we said that we were going to revise B1B to make sure that it,
Yes, so I
Cover-
will fix that. Yep, I'll get the updated draft. And then we're here. Oops. And then you guys wanted this guy, right?
yes. I
Okay.
think that's a great pictorial for this slide, which is a great extract from the ordinance itself.
Okay, perfect.
So the can you go back to the, yeah, there. So the way I see putting these two together, the lovely graphic that you just had a minute ago, and this is to be able to say that last zone is one of these values based on which of these categories, these types of facilities you fit in. Is that clear from that? Do we need to make some modified version of the schematic? Or do we just say, okay, here's how we qualify that zone between the existing freeboard and the SLR? You know, how do we graphically perhaps incorporate the information here, or do we just leave it here in this table and not bother?
Well, the graphic talks about BFE, and here we say, you know, BFE is either the 100 or 200 or 200, or excuse me, the 100 or the 500-year event. It says sea level rise, and we say here in this chart which sea level rise applies to each category, and then it's constant freeboard.
Because remember, I think when Bob put this together, it was just to give an example what the numbers could be. Because again, these are all numbers will be different based on what the BFE is. So
And what year you calculated. Every year it's going to change.
correct.
Right.
And yeah, because my BFE might be 8, yours might be 9, but we're both using 40. So my end result's going to be different than yours. And I think that's what we want to, I think that the diagram just kind of makes it, I think it just, it's clean, because I don't want anybody to get attached to going, well, that chart says my number is this, so that's my number, when it's just a reference point.
Well, and that's
so
why-
how do we need to modify the formatting of this table right here? I noticed that there's a spelling error in the title, sample calculation. There should be an L in there after the CA.
So this was for
However we do
internal,
this.
this was for internal understanding.
Okay, so that
I'm
we're
not
not planning on
sure.
presenting that.
Yeah, if we put that out there with a number,
Yeah,
your feet's going to be held to it.
so we're
No,
gonna
no.
take that chart away and put this guy there.
1 second.
Yeah.
Go back to that chart. We specifically added the last bullet saying this is the current projections. The data is presumed to change as better, newer information comes in. The purpose of this was because the text of the ordinance has got numbers or references buried in it. And the purpose of this was to take a snapshot in time. Today, February, whatever the hell day it is, I lost track. These are the numbers that are out there. However, these numbers are not, if you come back a year from now, necessarily the same numbers.
So I could imagine doing that. Then the recommendation I make is that you change the title of this thing to say sample calculation for, and you put the date. And because the other thing I was trying to get at before is when you look at it's not exponential, but there's an increasing rate of increase through time, right? It's not a straight linear growth pattern for sea level rise. So, you know, we can't just simply add numbers based on the number of years, because down the line, the numbers are going to get bigger from year to year.
a 40-year difference in the future is different than 40 years
Correct.
now.
I think you need some chart that shows something like that for communication. You can and should call it sample calculation, call
Commu-
it November 2020. But, I
So-
think
If-
the ordinance itself could be a little confusing to someone who just, who came on the scene and tried to read it and figure out where they're at.
So-
Or somebody
Just-
took a public hearing and tried to understand it.
Maybe chew on this idea a little bit, that you've already gone through this in the ordinance discussion, but that maybe you could use the graphic that Janelle has been showing us and use one of these as an example, maybe the critical facility one, because the only ones who will hang their hat on that are people who are putting up critical facilities, which is us, the government. And that way you're sort of giving an example, but you've already been through it on the ordinance discussion.
I'm also thinking, and if you notice, I just put the chart in there for our projections. If we put the diagram in there and then go, okay, this is your diagram, but don't forget, depending on what year you're going out, you're adding that to your base flood elevation. So whatever your base flood elevation is, and this is your sea level rise, that the difference between here and here is going to change based on, what is here and what year you're going out. Does
So-
that make sense?
And which class of facility you are. Yeah.
Correct.
Go back up one page.
Did you duplicate the slide? Or
Yeah.
did you?
No,
Okay.
I just duplicated it. Just
Okay,
copied
I
it.
was- It's important that it be a top.
Yeah.
what we had.
Nope, it's still there. I just thought it's a good way to reinforce the numbers and the projections out.
Well, is it worth building on what Charlie was suggesting? Is it worth, basically penciling in okay, I'm a critical facility. Here's how I negotiate this chart. I'm in the year
How about-
2040. I got to look out so many years, and here's where I'm going to be.
How about we do this? How about we take the diagram that shows the building with the base flood elevation, the freeboard, and the sea level rise projection, and then go back to the other chart and take column 2 and column 3, the highlighted and the sea level rise, crop that out and put it on the diagram.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I just think this chart's a lot like what you guys were saying at the beginning. It's a lot to see and digest at one glance.
Because the other has the sea level rise projection, which is whatever, and this defines whatever the sea level rise projection is in different categories. And it's not tied to a specific number, like even the base flood changes in this.
The way I look at this chart, the more I look at it and listen to this conversation, this is basically a progress, sort of an internal progress
Right.
chart for
Yep.
how far along the whole scheme we are. Like I look at this last column that Bob put in about coverage limits. When I first looked at it, that was sort of confusing to me. And then I realized what he was doing there. I think that's a column that needs some special attention.
Okay, so we'll tweak this slide, and then do you guys want to reinforce with this one?
I-
Or
I
no?
don't know if we need to. I think we just put in the talking points
Okay,
that we have slide, whatever number that is up above, which shows the increasing trend of sea level rise.
Yeah, that
Okay.
asterisk, Tom, I agree. That asterisk item on that one, Janelle, at the bottom, yeah, that asterisk can be transferred over to your graphic, and I
Yeah.
think that's what you're getting at.
yes.
Well, I mean, that highest zone between the freeboard line on Janelle's graphic and the sea level rise line that's just underneath the choice of the house. that's a variable number based on whatever facility it is that you're representing, right? I don't know if there's a way of somehow having that be in there, but that to me is the thing that matters is, this is a variable number. It's not just something you get to pick off a graph. The number you pick off the graph depends on
Yeah,
which facility you are, which class of facility you are in the ordinance.
that might be something you can speak to, Sumner, instead of, I mean, I guess you could put it on the graphic, but then the graphic would start getting busy too.
No, and I like the simplicity of the graphic. You're right. We can explain it all. And for that reason, I didn't mind the idea that there was a second version of you've since removed it, Janelle, but the second with the three colored
Let me try
curves, just to remind people, okay, here's how this works. We don't have to spend any time on it, but it's here if we need it.
Yeah, and I just try to, like, when I give a presentation, I try to reinforce what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think, okay, we just talked about the ordinance. We got a nice little diagram. Don't forget, everything's going to change. This is where we've got to go. And then I'm not sure, I think the little graphic replaces this guy.
That was a placeholder. Sumner had talked about the area that got flooded several
Right.
times.
This
And
is
we weren't
perfect.
addressing that, so I was explaining what that was.
So I think I would love to have this be a part of the conversation, but I think we're not quite there yet. I noticed when I reread the minutes that we approved a little while ago, Mike Powell's comments about the importance of looking at the areas adjacent to the current floodplain, and we've spent some time talking about it. I hope we look at this graph and we think a little more about this as we get into the new development phase. I think this chart's probably better for the next phase of discussion than now.
Okay. So we
Well, let's-
stop at slide 19 then?
Yeah, but let's talk about slide 19. There's a couple of things editorially. I think we
Yeah,
here.
we cannot, by the way, we cannot get into limiting lease terms for lease properties. That is not under the jurisdiction of the subcommittee nor the planning commission. So
Well,
just an FYI for that.
Let's just explain to Sumner and Bob. There's two separate sets of there's two types of leases. One of the leases is the city-owned property, like along the canal. And those are all set to expire in 2025. And then city council has to decide what they're going to do with those. The other one is the land leases that exist out on the beach as part of the grant. And those have a 99-year lease, automatically renewable. So we don't necessarily have, we don't necessarily have any legal jurisdiction over them. So I agree with what Janelle just said, but the council needs to is going to look at as the leases come up on the canal side. But remember, all that land that's on the canal side is zoned as open space, so there's no structures on it other than gazebos or boathouses.
Janelle, there's a comment from Nick
Yes.
in the chat that
In the
that I
chat.
think you've addressed before. Do you want to?
Yeah, as part of this ordinance, we are not looking at amending the height for any building. So it would be whatever the current height limit is based on that zoning classification.
It's worth noting that the height limit is higher in the R3 beach area than it is in the corresponding other areas of the city. And the way it was explained to me was that was because it acknowledged the greater possibility of flooding over there.
So
Am
it's
I
not
right about that?
actually just the R3. It's if you're in the floodplain, you're in the
Okay, that's
AE,
what's floodplain. Okay.
your height is different than if you're outside the floodplain because it does take that into consideration. So
Even
there
better.
was not any proposal to amend the height as part of this. And I'm going to reiterate, we did a building permit look a a while ago to make sure that what are we doing today would work with, like, if we did the 18 inches and another 3 feet, and just based on a handful of building permits, they were complying with the height requirement and still meeting the proposed sea level rise ordinance.
Right.
So without any height issues. Okay, so back onto slide 19.
So the first bullet, we need to take out will certainly and change that to may. I mean, we can't, we don't have certainty in anything, so.
Take out the will too.
Yeah, will also. And they may be
And
flooded
maybe say in the future.
in the future.
Yeah.
Okay.
The fourth bullet, the state sets regulations for stormwater managers. So this bullet, really, I think this was, and Bob, I'm not sure you wrote this.
Yeah, I
Were
wrote,
you trying to get to what my comments were?
I'm sorry?
Well, what I think this is should be saying is that the state sets the storm events and the water quality that a stormwater management system has to meet. And what hasn't been updated, because actually the stormwater management was updated, but what my concern is that they're looking at historic storm data and not future storm data. And even then, the historic storm data is over 20 years old.
So, and my question on this is this really going to be related to, again, you're looking at creating, the way I'm reading it is maybe looking at setting up stormwater management regulations, which is not what, that's an item on the action plan. But I'm not sure if the subcommittee, this is going to be the subcommittee that does that. And I'm not sure we want to put that as tied to our sea level rise.
Well, one of the
So
other
I think it's,
Because I know the concern is that the stormwater management regulations don't take sea level rise into consideration. However, that is a DENREC issue that I'm not sure how much control, except for creating something, a new something, a completely different ordinance to address that the subcommittee is going to be able to tackle.
Well, one of the aspects is, besides, is the discharges of the stormwater management potentially will be below sea level rise.
You could, I wrote it in there because it's come up, okay? And it's been sort of said that the state is behind the times, as Tom described, in that regard. And with sea level rise, you get 2 foot of sea level rise, it makes some significant set of stormwater management completely ineffective.
by the way, add a 1.5 feet of groundwater table rise and you have a much bigger problem.
So my question here is, we've just said, hey, this is our ordinance. We want to hear your comments.
Right.
Do we just want to state, in the future, we're looking at resiliency, which is the name of the ordinance, other resiliency items and new development, and just leave it at that, so we keep them focused on the critical facilities and the redevelopment? Because we know we've got a parking lot of not just these, but a lot, but I'm not sure we want to bring out the parking lot items
I
and get
agree
caught,
with,
because
you know,
I think we want to keep us focused.
I-
Thoughts?
I'm not trying to keep it in there. It's just,
No, I'm just,
it was late Saturday night and I was like,
I
So,
think it's a good point. I just think it's something that needs to be, it's gonna take some time and we need to work with the state and the Sussex Conservation District. But, and I do agree with Tom that the statistics that are in the regulations now probably need some updating. But I agree that maybe this shouldn't be part of this discussion for the ordinance.
so I think what we can do here is, because we definitely have new development for subcommittee future discussion, and just leave it broad, because that way we don't get into,
Well, I think the first bullet, the,
because I think what we want to do is keep them focused on the ordinance in front of them and going, yep, we're going to look at resiliency options, which I think can take a ton of different options, and new development.
I think we need to, we have to anticipate what the public's gonna ask. And some of these areas, like the first bullet of areas not included in the current floodplain maps that are adjacent to the areas included, I think that needs to be back in there, because that is, to Sumner's point, that is the next genesis of where we need to be going.
Which I'll play devil's advocate in the future. When they revise the FEMA maps, they will be mapped in, so they would no longer be outside the floodplain.
Right. but
The
we-
problem with
we
that
need-
is that between now and then, who knows what decisions will be made that will preclude whatever good new information will happen. I mean,
So
we're stuck in
Again-
this weird time frame.
so
We're
again,
always going to be stuck in this weird time frame. But I want to go back to what Janelle's been trying to say. I don't think we need to make much of a bulleted list here, because we do want
yeah,
to keep this really simple and make sure that we elicit the commentary relative to the ordinance rather than all the other things. Having said that, I hope that, I mean, I don't mind keeping the one you just pulled out.
okay,
I think it's important that we capture what people are thinking about in that meeting, whether or not they get up and say it in the meeting or whether they share with us their thoughts later on. But I think we also may generate what I'd call parking lot issues that they may generate. I'd like to be able to hear what they're thinking. Do you know what I mean?
I
I
do,
don't-
but I want them focused on the first two items, because, and I'm just going to say this again, sorry, this is not the only ordinance that's having public comment that night. So I don't want us to forget that, because this is a very important ordinance, but I want to be able to keep us focused on what's being proposed, with the understanding that we still got a lot of work to do.
Okay.
Because this
so
is
what's
just like the
other
first
ordinance?
steps.
Is the other ordinance the excellent recharge thing?
Yes.
All right, so where are the BMPs, the design guidelines being discussed?
Here.
So,
Do you want me to?
I'm just wondering, because
Because
yeah.
again, this is a separate ordinance. The excellent recharge area is a separate ordinance from the sea level rise ordinance. They just happen to match, and I need to keep those two separate for discussion purposes. I don't want us going back and forth, and like, I don't want us, if we're going to do sea level rise, I don't want us talking about excellent recharge area. And when we're talking about excellent recharge area, I don't want us talking about the sea level rise, because they are two different ordinances.
and yet the
Even
though they-
reality is
even
that
though
we're
they
relying on
match
bunch
a
of
lot.
BMPs that
Yes,
undergird both of them.
right. I expect some changes that could happen to the excellent recharge area, just based
So-
on some comments I have received back from agencies.
So, but I think the Summers question, when the meeting notice gets posted, the BMPs, the proposed ordinance, and our presentation will all get posted.
Yes. There will be two items on the agenda. One is discussion, presentation and discussion, public comment of the sea level rise ordinance. And the second item will be presentation, public comment of the excellent recharge ordinance.
And will
But-
both of them reference the same BMP document?
For the design guidelines, yes, but
Because
this is
that's
one
a,
ordinance and then there's a different
Sussex.
ordinance. But they both reference the design guidelines. That is the only thing shared between the two by way of ordinance.
So my question is there meant to be some presentation of that document, some discussion about the details of that document in either of these hearings?
That's up to you guys.
My intention is that would just be put out as part of the file. And if we get questions on it, fine, but I was gonna spend the most of the time on the presentation here and not on the nitty gritties of the design guidelines.
Because I think that,
I don't think we have enough time to do both. And if it garners a lot of questions, then we can handle it. But otherwise, I don't see the reason to go into that.
because again, think about it, we're given a big picture overview for the public so they understand. And both this ordinance and the design guidelines have been on the website for months. And we're always happy to answer questions because and also we're trying to get their questions so then we can answer them, or, maybe we need to think about them and then answer them at the next planning commission meeting. So this is kind of, we're giving you some information, but we also are information gathering from the public.
So that second category where we're getting questions to help, I'll put it in my terms, to help refine, to help
These 3
the
pages.
LPC discussion following the hearing. I just want to make sure that we don't lose everybody in these 2 hearings. I hope that we're going to get decent feedback, that shows they understood what we're saying. I'm becoming more worried as time goes by that we're going to lose everybody. I mean, we have a comment in the chat right now, which is an interesting question. Richard Nichols asks a question about how we're arriving at numbers. I assume that there is a table of values that was used to create that curve. I hope that's what you mean by that, Mr. Nichols. But this is just a graphical representation of a finer level of data developed by a group of technical experts at the state, pulling together data from a whole bunch of national level scientific documents. So these aren't numbers that were dreamed up in vacuum. They're numbers that come from a whole lot of science. But I believe there's a table of data that would go year by year in order to generate that graph. I've never seen it. Brett, do you know if there is such a table?
I'm afraid to say I don't believe there is.
But there's a lot of data behind this curve.
There are a lot of data.
There's a lot of
There is,
information.
And I'm hoping that Delaware is like Maryland, and every 3, 4, 5 years they do a sea level rise projection update.
Yeah.
And the new update is a little more data heavy than what this is.
Yeah.
Tom, Sumner, you're correct. It's based on international data collection and international studies. Danielle has a little better understanding of that background.
Okay. But yeah, well, maybe we'll have to find out a little. I mean, I have a sense of who generated that chart. We could probably reach out to them.
So yeah, we took this chart. This chart came from a state technical advisory committee that put this data together, and they did the projections. I believe they're going to be working on it again. I think new data is due out this year or next year. I think based on their time frame, because this I believe is the 2017 data, and they're trying to do it every 5 years, so they're getting close. Okay, so we have a PowerPoint presentation. Sumner, you owe me a photo or two. I'm
And what
gonna,
you'd really like, is it critical? I'm assuming it doesn't need to be the same date. It's just something that depicts flooding in certain parts of the city.
correct. Again, we're just trying to explain what we're seeing now is going to continue to happen and more often based on this. And we're just, like, and again, this is what this is showing. This is showing that flooding is going to increase over time. We're going to see more of it. And we've already started seeing it, we've seen these floods everywhere. So yeah, just get me a photo or two, and then I will get the floodplain map updated, and I will get the agenda posted, because that is on my to-do list for today, because it has to be posted by tomorrow.
And Janelle, I'd like one last cut before it ever gets out.
Okay.
This way, make sure it's clean. And I'm happy with the 17 slides. A lot, there's like 4 copies of the placekeeper slides in there, and then photos. It's down to a manageable size.
Yeah, especially because again, we want to keep this, 20 minutes, because 20 minutes is a good, if not shorter, presentation to get this information out there, because you start losing people at a certain point, and what we want is to hear their feedback. So just keep that in mind. And I'm going to date this as today, and I'm going to make those changes, and I will send it back out. But I'm going to need it back as soon as possible. Brent, hand up.
No, sorry.
Okay.
Stretching.
Nope. That's okay. That's why I asked.
I got 17 things going on right now.
And thank you
Multitasking.
for all the help today, the comments, the very productive, constructive comments today. I really appreciate them.
I've been a part of similar things before, and I know getting to it and telling them what it is. So a lot of people trust that the Planning Commission is there for a reason, and you guys are presenting good information. So you don't necessarily have to do the whole cooking show. You just have to show them the finished plate.
Do the bait and switch. This is what it looks like at the beginning, and here's the end product. Always have that one back up in the oven. I like that. I'm going to use that, Brent.
Have the cooked cake in the back. I like that. Yeah.
All right, so
I'm
I
feeling
think
good
we
about
need-
this, guys.
need
Bob,
to set
thank
it
you
up.
for putting all that together.
Yeah, great information in
Yes.
there.
Good job, guys. So do you guys want a next meeting, or do you want to see what's coming out of
Set one
Planning
after
Commission.
set one after the public hearing, because we want to make sure we're ready to go to Planning Commission.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay,
Okay, so you have Monday the 15th or Tuesday the 16th, because the 17th is Planning Commission.
Let's do Monday.
Monday, 11 o'clock.
It's fine with me.
To me,
If that does not work, because I'll still have to check the city calendar.
15th.
I can do Tuesday as well.
Monday the 15th at the moment via Zoom at 11. Does that work, Brent?
Hold on.
Okay. Everybody check your calendars.
I'm okay.
How am I missing? Yes, that works.
Okay. Yeah, and there's nothing on the city calendar at the moment. Yay. So I will get that scheduled, and I'll see you guys on the 11th. By the way, who's doing the presentation?
I'll be doing the presentation.
Okay, just making sure. Okay. Anything else?
That should be it.
Good.
Well, thank you all very
Thank
much, and thanks for everyone, for the participants for hanging in there.
All right, motion to adjourn.
We have a second.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you
Bye.
guys. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
You're down to 16 things, Brent.